Good morning and welcome to Awaken Church. It is good to be here this morning, and I'm excited about the opportunity that we have to jump into the next part of our series on Facebook Live. Before we do, I'm going to take some time and run through a few announcements just to make sure that as a church, we're all going to be on the same page moving forward. Really, the big announcement that we have is that Awaken will be opening up our Sunday morning service and Sunday morning church gatherings in just a couple of weeks. And so, before I share the details of that, I want to remind you all and let you all know that, again, if you've been with us through this process, from a very early time in the process, we made the decision that as we were thinking about how to respond to this COVID pandemic, we're going to build our decisions around the twin pillars of faith and wisdom. And faith being answering the question of how do our decisions reflect our trust in God, and wisdom being how do these decisions are they consistent with the principles and commands of Scripture? And these are the pillars that are driving our decisions. And I know that there are a lot of others, and I think that they encompass others, like how to shepherd and care for our people during this time, how to keep our people safe, there's a lot of other questions that are entangled in that. But as a church and as the people of God, we are determined first and foremost, right, that our commander-in-chief is Jesus. And so how are we going to, as a church, move forward in faith in a way that reflects our trust in him, and wisdom in a way that's consistent with the Scriptures? And part of the reason why we made that decision is we haven't, over the course of the past 4 or 5 months, have any of the pastors heard a clear God speaking to us and saying, open or don't open the church service. And so what we have done is we made many decisions to wait. Wait until an opportune time. Well, as your pastors and our leadership team, we are united that opportune time has come. And so we're going to be opening up our Sunday service starting in 2 weeks on Sunday morning, August 23rd. Sunday morning, August 23rd, we'll be opening our services back up for the foreseeable future. Again, we walk by faith, not by sight. I want you to know that none of this has been easy, going through this process, making these decisions, thinking through how to care for you all while still being able to move forward in faith. There have been very few easy decisions throughout this whole process, if we're to be perfectly honest with you. But as pastors and as leaders in the church that we've been having conversations with, we do believe that this is the best next step we can make while being focused on our mission as a church and still accommodating as many of our church members as possible. So to be clear, those who want to remain home and continue streaming, obviously feel free to continue to do so. We're not compelling anyone to return. As leaders, we're fully committed to serving you, to blessing you, and to doing whatever we can to help you feel connected to the community of believers, even if you're not physically able to be present. But for those in the church, and there's a considerable number in our church who felt like we have been wanting to come together and gather again in a safe way, we're now giving you the option to choose to do so. And that's what this decision does. It allows those who want to remain in streaming mode to continue to do so, and those who feel like I am ready and prepared to gather together and honor the safety practices that have been put in place by the church. And for you, we are opening up the doors to be able to come together. And with that, however, I want there to be a couple of clear understandings. One is that no preparation is going to be perfect. No one has figured this out perfectly, and we are certainly not an exception to that rule. That being said, what we're putting in place seems reasonable and thoughtful, and they also imply a certain degree of trust. And when I say that, what I mean is when you go to a grocery store or go to a shopping center or whatever, there's not this implicit idea that the people coming in are watching out for everyone else. But it's different as a church body. And the implication that we have is as you're coming back, for those of you who are choosing to come and worship with us physically, you are going to be guarding us as much as we're going to be taking steps to guard you. And one of the practical things that means is that if you or your family is sick or you have any reason to believe that you might be positive for COVID, then you're just going to stay at home. You're going to take necessary precautions and not do anything to intentionally, deliberately, or even incidentally cause someone else in the community to get sick. And I know, I'm just saying that you're watching out for us as much as we're watching out for you. With that said, this is how Sunday service is going to look. I'm going to fly through this rather quickly because we're going to revisit this a few times. But I want to go through some of the big highlights of what this is going to look like. And we'll begin by saying sign up if you want to attend. Sign-ups are always going to be open on the Sunday afternoon before the upcoming Sunday service. So you're going to have a full week to sign up, but we're not going to let you sign up for multiple weeks in a row. We're going to make you and force you to sign up every single week. There's a number of reasons for this I'm not going to get into, but that's how we're going to be able to manage our numbers and also allow for families to be able to sign up for Awaken Kids rooms. Second, Awaken Kids as a ministry is closed. We are not going to be having volunteers watching kids. I apologize for those of you that that makes it an impossibility for you to come out and be physically with us. That may change in the near future, but for now, that's just the way that it's going to be. That being said, what we are doing as a church is we are offering our Awaken Kids rooms to be available to be checked out. If you as a family or a family group want to take care of your own childcare, bring your kids in, we will make those rooms available. No charge, free AC. We'll go ahead and sanitize them. We'll go through that in just a little bit, but here's how the process is going to work. As you sign up to participate in the service, so say, for example, after this afternoon, you're going to sign up for next Sunday service, which we're not meeting next Sunday. I'm just using it as an example. So this afternoon, you would sign up for next Sunday service. Before you do so, decide, is my family going to need a room for my children? Or are a couple of families that we feel comfortable with sharing space with and having our kids interact with, that family group, are we interested in going ahead and reserving a room? And if you are, then go ahead and sign up, and everyone needs to sign up, but only one person will need to reserve the room. So that's how we're going to put that in place. We have single family rooms available, we have a couple of doubles, and we have a supersized room available. So please choose appropriately. If you're coming in and you've got 2 kids, please don't sign up for our multi-purpose room, right? That's just a bit of an overkill right there. It is going to be first come, first serve, so just jump on the registration as you can. So just to be clear how this is going to work, we will be providing the room. We'll be providing TV. We'll be providing so the TV can be used to stream the service, or it can be used to play videos from Right Now Media for your kids. We're going to sanitize the room before you come in, and another amazing number of resources. Plus, what we are going to do as a church is we're going to be offering you one free masked roamer that's going to be walking through that area and available to help out if you need some more information, if you have any questions, or if you have a small emergency like an exploding diaper happen to you. They'll be available to help out just a bit there. You, on the other hand, are going to be responsible for providing childcare, snacks, diapers, and whatever else is needed. So hopefully that is clear. Again, we'll send out that information. And if you missed anything or wanted to check through anything, just press rewind. Masks for everyone else is going to be required for anyone who's going to be attending and being a part of our cafe or sanctuary space. If you can be mistaken for a grown-up and are in here, then you will need to wear a mask. Please bring one so that you can be comfortable. But if you forget, we will have masks available at the front. And yes, you will need to wear them the entire time. limited physical contact and physical distancing, please. So if you're sitting in our sanctuary space, between your family group and the next family group, there needs to be at least one seat and maybe even 2 seats between you guys. So elbow bumps, foot taps, but please no hugging, handshakes, anything like that at all. Even if the 2 people who are doing it feel comfortable, we're going to ask that everyone refrain for the sake of, again, you're watching out for those around you as much as we're watching out for you. So there are a few other small rules that we're going to have posted in our foyer and in our cafe area that are unique to those spaces. When you come in, please read those rules and abide by them. Again, we're a church family, and everything that we do, we want to be doing in a spirit of love, unity, honor, and respect. Bottom line, we're going to be opening up our Sunday morning services starting on August 23rd. Sign up if you want to attend. That's how we're going to be opening up and defining who's able to participate in this time. And please, as you come, if you come, please follow the rules. Otherwise, we will have to cancel culture, shame you, and drag you kicking and screaming into a corner somewhere and give you wedgies until you cry out, never, ever, ever to do that again. Okay, so good. Speaking of kicking and screaming and putting you in a corner and giving you wedgies, our topic this morning is going to be on mental illness. And that topic is one that you chose as we're in the middle of this series that we've entitled Facebook Live. So what this series is all about is our spending 4 weeks tackling topics that you, Awaken Church, determined that you wanted us as pastors to speak more directly on. And the Awaken voters have chosen, and thus far we tackled the topic of loneliness, race and diversity, today mental illness, and next week predestination and free will. So it's quite the range of topics, more than each of the topics, more than we could possibly cover completely in the short time that we have, and yet we're going to tackle it nonetheless. For full disclosure, I was wondering a little bit why this topic came up. Again, it was, I think, the second highest one that was rated, and for me, I felt like, gosh, this is really a surprise, because I feel like as a church, we talk more about mental health issues than most other churches, and so I had to sit back as I was preparing for this and think through, well, what is it that you, church, are wanting for us to speak more directly about? Because we have covered this topic multiple times. I want more specifics on what types of mental illness there are. Or you want more specifics on treatment. You want to talk more about if mental illness is real. There seem to be so many different directions. And oh, by the way, tackle it in 30 minutes, please. So this is going to be an interesting time where I'm going to tackle the questions or the heart behind why this is an important topic for you. But I'm taking my best guess on this because I didn't have the opportunity to follow up. There's no names that were given. This was an anonymous survey. So I'm going to take my best shot. But what we are doing is we're making Awaken Q&A available. So that means if you have any questions, comments, or thoughts, feel free to text them to awakenqa@gmail.com, and I will make sure that we carve out some time at the end to be able to tackle your concerns and your thoughts and the reason why this is an issue for you more specifically. So, with that said, one more thing before we dive in. Awaken kids, I am so sorry. I just keep talking and talking and talking, and that is totally my bad, and I know you've been bored to death. So, all right, give me your full attention, and we're going to talk about how you're going to help us out today. I want you, kids, if you're giving me eyes on me, I want you today to either create or draw for me a picture of a blind man trying to find a swimming pool. Not Nate trying to find a mic, a blind man trying to find a swimming pool. So that's what I want you to do. You can either create it using objects in your house, action figures, whatever, or you can draw me a picture. But I want you to draw me a picture or create a picture of me, of a blind man trying to find a swimming pool. So I know that sounds weird. Trust me, it's all going to make sense later. Parents, whenever your child is done, if you could indicate their name, take a picture of what they've created, and then send it in to awakenvisuals@gmail.com. Awesome? Go for it. All right. Back to mental illness. So let's start from the beginning and let's run through some statistics. So for those of you who don't know much about mental illness and how pervasive an issue this is, I'm going to run through it with you. Statistically, according to the National Institute of Mental Health, nearly 1 in 5 adults in the United States lives with a mental health illness. That is almost 20%, and that includes nearly 50 million adults in this country alone. 5% of adults in this country would be categorized as severely mentally ill, and that is a lot of people. We're talking about, if you're comparing it to how many people have got tested positive for COVID, we're not even talking about a reasonable comparison here. We're talking about hundreds of times more frequent. And it is a problem that continues to be overlooked, continues to be marginalized, and continues to be neglected. And it's not a problem that's restricted to adults. Over 13% of youth, that's people between the ages of 12 and 17, have reported suffering at least one major depressive episode over the course of the past year. 9% of youth have been diagnosed with major depressive disorder. That represents about 3 million youth in America today, and that is a single mental health disorder out of the many that impact youth today. 1 in 6 adults in America today report taking a psychiatric drug to treat their mental illness. 1 in 6 are on medication for a mental illness today. Those numbers are outrageous. And what has the church done in response to this epidemic? And I think that's a more legitimate use of the word. The honest answer is not a lot. We're doing better. But the sad truth is when it comes to mental illness, in many ways, many churches still have this idea that mental illness is a sin problem. It's a character problem. It's a problem that affects those who are weak-willed or weak-minded. It's a problem that affects those who have been abused or mistreated in some way, but isn't something that's supposed to affect normal people. And when that view is directed at mental illness by the church, then a problem arises in the church, doesn't it? Because if the church is viewing, and again, not all, just if that is the viewpoint of any group, but a church in particular, that mental illness is predominantly a sin problem or a weak character problem, then the solution that is oftentimes implemented if it's a sin problem or a character problem is that you simply need to repent. You need to grow in your faith. You need to grow in your spiritual maturity. And if you're continuing to manifest those symptoms, then what that means is somehow you are failing as a Christian in your faith. And I want you to think about what that does and what that implies to a Christian who's drowning in anxiety, to a Christian who's mired in depression, to a Christian who feels trapped in some type of addiction. What happens when the church and your church leaders are telling you that your mental illness, the mental illness you're struggling with, the mental disorder that you're struggling with, is a result of your sin and your poor character? Well, it does a couple of things, doesn't it? One, it causes a number to leave because I can't handle that. I know it's not true, and the only way to escape that message is to simply leave the church and thus separate me from the people who are most supposed to care for me and love me. That's a tragic end. And then others stay in the church, but they stay in the church and go into hiding. I've learned and I've been taught that I just don't talk about it anymore. I don't bring it up. I don't mention it. I put on my plastic smile and I remain trapped in my mental illness. And on top of that, I'm having to deal with guilt and shame. I'm separating myself from people I love by not talking to them, not being open with them, and I'm forced to hide myself and protect myself from the people I'm supposed to be most connected with and most be able to trust. That is a miserable way to live. And then there are those of us, the 80%, those of us who aren't necessarily struggling with a mental illness, but we have friends and family who are. what are we supposed to do when we hear that message? That mental illness is tied to sin or weak character or weak-mindedness or trauma in your past. And what that leaves me with is the only option that I have, because I don't want to be enabling weak character or enabling sin, is to function as cheerleader. You know? Come on, you can overcome this. You can do this. You can break these chains of sin on your life. You just have to believe more, pray more, read the Bible more, have more faith, trust God, and you know what? I will pray for you. And that is the best we've got. That's all we have if this is the message that our leaders continuously press into us on this topic. We have to do better. And when I say that, I include our church, right? A church where we have multiple trained and licensed mental health counselors. And that, again, most of you know, includes myself. This is my background and training. I'm not currently, but I was licensed marriage and family therapist, licensed mental health counselor. We have multiple leaders in our church trained and equipped in this, and yet still, this seems to be an issue that needs to be addressed more directly as a body. And so we're not exempt from that charge to do better. So how are we going to do this, especially in the limited time that we have? I want to begin by sharing a story found in the book of John that I think will help frame how we are to have this conversation. And again, I do look forward to tackling some things more specifically in our Q&A time. This story is found in the book of John, chapter 9, starting in verses 1 and 2, and it begins this way. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. Rabbi, his disciples asked him, why was this man born blind? Was it because of his own sin or his parents' sin? So Jesus and his disciples are traveling in the first century, and they're walking down this road, and they come across this man who has been born blind. And believe it or not, the first question that comes to the minds of the disciples is, why was this man born blind? Was it because he sinned or because his parents did? Now, we all recognize that today that would be a ridiculous question. It would be an offensive question. It would be an ignorant question. It would be one that none of us would ask, because none of us would imagine that someone who is born blind is that way because of some sin they committed or some sin their parents committed. We wouldn't say that today any more than we would say someone who is born with a missing toe has that missing toe because of their sin, or someone who is born with any other physical disability has that because of the results of someone's sin. And I'm not talking about global sin. I'm just talking about someone's specific sin. That is just not how God works. And we all understand that, except we do this with people that we know who have mental illness, who struggle with a mental disorder. The reason why you're struggling with this mental illness is because somehow you must be the one doing something wrong. You must somehow be the one in sin, or you had some sin committed towards you. And I just want to say off the hop that for the most part, that's not how mental disorders work. That's not how mental illness works. And more importantly, it's important to be clear, that's not how God works, as Jesus makes clear as we read on, starting in verse 3. It was not because of his sins or his parents' sins, Jesus answered. So he tackles that issue right off the bat. That is not the reason why this man is blind. This happened so the power of God could be seen in him. We must quickly carry out the tasks assigned us by the one who sent us. The night is coming, and then no one can work. But while I am here in the world, I am the light of the world. So Jesus begins by making it clear that this blind man's problem is not the result of sin, neither his own sin or his parents' sin. That is not how God works. That's what Jesus is saying. And in addition, he's saying one more thing. He's saying by asking that question and fixating on that question, you are missing the point. The point is, what this man is lacking is creating an opportunity for God to fill. What this man is missing, God now has an opportunity to fully supply. His injury opens the door for God's healing, and we have a part to play in that healing. That is the point Jesus makes in the passages that follow. And this idea goes against, I want you to understand, how many of us are trained to think. Because what I just shared might seem logical, but it is not how most of us are trained to think. The way most of us are trained to think is when we detect a problem, we look for someone to blame. I mean, come on, do I have to say any more than that? That's how our politics works today. That's how the media works today. That's how businesses work today. When something goes wrong, we find someone or something to blame. And sometimes that's fine. If my car is breaking down, I want to find out what there is to blame and fix it. If this door won't open for some reason, then yes, let's find out what's to blame. But when it comes to people, that is a very bad habit to fall into. To blame someone whenever misfortune arises is a bad habit, and yet that narrative is alive and well in our world today. But it should not be how children of God view people. And I'm not trying to eliminate personal responsibility. Again, there are numerous times when we need to take responsibility because our bad actions or foolish actions do lead to a specific consequence. I'm simply saying that Christians should not fall into the trap or into the habit of first blaming the victim when some misfortune happens to them. That should be what the children of God avoid. Speaking of misfortune, I don't think we should forget about the blind man. He's blind, remember? Not deaf. So that means this entire conversation has been going on, and he's been listening to these disciples insult him by assuming that his blindness is about him or about his parents. And he's like, you don't even know me, right? And then Jesus makes this claim about how God's power is going to be demonstrated through him. And so he's probably thinking what some of us do when we read this passage. So wait. Is you saying the reason why I'm blind is just so this moment so you could heal me? And imagine how he must feel as a response to that, right? A bit hopeful, maybe, but also really hurt. And yet he has remained quiet the entire time, waiting for what Jesus is going to do next. Verse 6 and 7. Then he, that's Jesus, then he spit on the ground, made mud with the saliva, and spread the mud over the blind man's eyes. And he told him, go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam. Siloam means sent. So the man went and washed and came back seeing. This is a fascinating passage. The blind man, again, just to remind you, has just been standing there hanging out when Jesus and his disciples passed. He wasn't begging for money. That's not what the scriptures say. He wasn't asking for help. He wasn't that beggar who says, Jesus, Son of God, Son of David, please help me and heal me. He was like not crying out at all. He was simply a bystander. He didn't even know it was Jesus and his disciples who were coming towards him because he's, blind. He was just standing there, and life came by, and life interrupted him, and his life is interrupted by these rude disciples and by a rabbi who gently corrects them and shares the hope that God will perform a miracle. And then here's the miracle: spit. That's the miracle, and a lot of it, because it takes quite a bit of spit to turn dirt into mud. Right? So there's spit on the ground, turned into mud, and then spreading that mud over this blind man's eyes. Now, remember what I shared earlier? If you're putting yourself in the blind man's shoes, he's already been insulted, he's already been hurt, and now he's being humiliated by having this wad of spit, mud, dirt placed over his eyes. And for him, he's probably thinking that the solution, the cure, does not seem to fit the problem. But before he can wipe that mud off of his eyes, Jesus speaks to him and says, wait, before you do that, I want you to go wash yourself off at the pool of Siloam. Go. Walk there blind. Go. So, as a heads up for you kids, I need you to start wrapping up your pictures right about now. Whatever you've created, whatever it is that you've drawn, needs to be done. Mom and Dad, if one of you could go ahead and take a picture of that thing that they've created and attach their name and go ahead and send it to awakenedvisuals@gmail.com. We're going to post them in just a moment. So for a number of years as a teenager and as a young adult, I've struggled with suicidal thoughts. For you, if you've been part of this church for a while, that's not a new statement. This isn't something that, it's something I've shared a number of different times in the past. And I've also told the story a number of times in the past, so I don't want to be repetitive and bore those of you who have heard it before. I just want to say that it was a pervasive struggle that I wrestled with on a daily basis for a period of about 6 to 7 years. It consumed my life. I obsessed over killing myself, ideas about different ways that might happen, and honestly, a couple of times I came pretty close. And then one night, the Lord freed me from it. It took a rebuke from Siva. It took a letter I wrote to Satan. And it took God finally opening up my eyes and helping me see the lies I was believing about myself. And it was that night that God truly set me free. And before we jump into assuming that we know what that means, let me explain to you what I mean when I say the Lord set me free. It does not mean, and it did not mean, that I never struggle with suicidal thoughts again. Absolutely, that's not true. As a matter of fact, I have already conceded that I will struggle with suicidal thoughts for the rest of my life. I still have them. As a matter of fact, 5 nights ago, I was in this crazed state. I was angry for no reason, and I went on this long drive at 10, 11 o'clock at night, and multiple times had these crazy ideas of swerving off the road and getting into this fatal accident in some way, shape, or form. That's 5 nights ago. And yet, when I say that God has set me free, what that means is that those suicidal thoughts, they no longer consume my life anymore. I can function normally. It's still a struggle, but those thoughts don't consume me and they don't haunt me. The place that they used to take at the center of my lives is now filled with Christ, filled with my family, filled with His church, and other things that I love. And I know I'm never going to follow through on any of those crazy thoughts nonetheless. I just need to cast them out or bring them to submission to Christ. But there were 6 or 7 years of my life when I could not have said that was true. And that experience is why I love this story that Jesus shares, that John shares in the scriptures here. Because in this story, God is the one, Jesus is the one who activates the healing, but the blind man had to also do his part. And that's the reality that I've experienced. God in one night healed me, but that healing is still contingent, right? There's still aspects of that healing that I still have to walk through in faith. God will do His part. The blind man had to do his part too. He has to believe Jesus. He has to believe that Jesus really can and will heal him. And then he has to stumble, stagger, and otherwise make his way to the pool. Only then does he actually experience healing. So let me take a moment and let's go ahead and look at these kids' pictures if we can. I'm excited to see Trip Hall. Oh man. Okay, first of all, that's an exceptional picture of a blind man being led to the pool by a dog. That is very, very creative. I was wondering actually how you kids were going to figure out a way that the blind man was going to get there. That is fantastic. Great job, buddy. And I like the sunglasses. That's really cool. Trip, I guess Trip's guy is giving up. I appreciate that. I know that for those of us who've gone through a journey, an extended journey to healing, there are multiple times when we just want to give up, throw up our hands, and quit. So thanks for showing that. In a kiddie pool, really? All right. Good. Anyone? So Clara, where is the pool? That is such a great question. And honestly, that's where a lot of us are too, right? When we believe that God has healed us, and yet we're still on the journey, there are a number of times when we're like, I don't know where to go next. I don't know where the next step is going to be. I've been there many times. And yet we continue to take steps forward. And I appreciate you sharing that, Clara. Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, Helena. You know, I love the fact that not only do you also have a pet leading you to that pool, but evidently your blind man is a royal blind man. So that is really cool. And he has a spade in his hand, I guess, in case anyone attacks him. So do not attack the blind man on the road. Cool, thanks. Oh, Caitlin. That's beautiful. I don't need to say anything else about it. Great job. Luke Bop. Hey, Luke Bop. Luke Bop and Luke Bop and Luke Bop. Yeah, buddy. I appreciate it. I have no idea what is happening here. I see a guy in a chair. I see a young lady evidently dead on the ground next to the pool. And so, yeah. So the blind guy ninja attacked this. No, the emo bumped into you. Cool. Susie, I appreciate that. Your blind man looks very, very happy. So thank you for sharing that picture. Anyone else? Glory. Wow. That, I agree with you. This is probably what the blind man was thinking when he was making his way towards the pool, right? This is a mess. I don't even know what direction to go in. I'm just going to walk around and hope I make my way there. So great job. Junie, I can't see the pool, but I will have a fire on my chest nonetheless. I appreciate that picture, and I appreciate how you illustrated in this how sometimes when we're struggling, we get abused, because obviously someone put on that ugly shirt on him without him knowing about it. So thanks for illustrating that point as well. And then Wyatt, blind, finding his way there. Awesome. Very, very cool. That's a great picture, guys. Junie? Oh, that shirt actually wasn't all that ugly. Just yellow doesn't suit a Chinese man very well. So anyway, kids, thank you so much for sharing your pictures with me. And church, I hope you get the idea that what these kids were trying to teach you, even though they didn't know they were trying to teach you, right? That whenever we talk about healing, many times what we want is instantaneous, complete healing. That means whatever it is I'm struggling with, however it is I'm in pain, physical pain, mental pain, emotional pain, whatever it might be, I want God, you to take it all and completely heal me right now. And sometimes God works that way. Oftentimes he does not. Oftentimes what God does is activate healing, and we have to walk in faith to experience the fullness of what that healing means. And many times the reason for that journey is there are things God is teaching us through pain and hurt and suffering that we need to learn, right? He didn't put them in our lives to test us and to try us, but when they happen, yeah, there's a process that we need to go through. And I appreciate how the kids have shown how that process is sometimes can be painful, confusing, we can get lost along the way, and yet we still must walk forward with a clear destination in mind. So let's recap. First, mental illness is real. It's not typically the result of moral failure, sin, or failure of character. People who are moral and people who are immoral both struggle with mental illnesses. People who sin and people who sin less all both struggle with mental illnesses. People of good character and high character and people of low character struggle with mental illness. Both rich and poor struggle with mental illness. There isn't a racial group, there isn't a gender, there isn't a nation, there isn't a city on the planet where someone in there is not struggling with some type of mental illness. It is real, it affects every type and every kind of person. Secondly, mental illness is not helped by blaming the person who has it. So follow me now. If mental illness is real and affects every type and kind of person, then why are we blaming the person who has one? That is ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense at all. Guilt and shame should not be attached to mental illness any more than guilt and shame should be attached to when you break a bone or when you find out that you have cancer. The feelings should not be tied to the disease, whether that disease be physical, emotional, or mental. Instead, we should view them as opportunities into which God's mercy and healing can enter. Finally, you have a part to play. You have a part to play. I firmly believe that for Christians who are suffering under mental illness, whether that be mild, moderate, or severe, God is going to act on your behalf. But let's be clear about what that means when we say God is going to act on your behalf. One thing I find interesting about this story is that I don't know when I read the scriptures and I read the stories in the scriptures, I often put myself in the story and try to imagine what's happening here. And so I put myself in the blind man's shoes, and here's the question I'm curious about, and maybe you are too, right? If you are, I'm wondering when the blind man was actually able to see. I wonder if it was the moment Jesus put mud on his face. I don't know. Maybe he was. The blind man doesn't know because his eyes were closed and covered with mud. But what we do know from the scriptures is whether or not he was healed in the moment or not is not the relevant point. He didn't experience healing until he walked in obedience. And that is a fascinating idea for us to play with, right? Because I think this is going to hold truth for many of us who are struggling with mental illness, right? And one of the realities about being a Christian who is struggling with mental illness is this realization that becoming a Christian didn't make me immune from them. Any more than becoming a Christian means I'm immune from breaking a bone or contracting cancer or anything else, right? That's just not how salvation works. This new life that we have must still be lived out in breakable bodies and imperfect minds. That being said, God still does offer healing. And for Christians, that healing oftentimes begins with seeking him, with prayer, with exercising faith. And along the way, oftentimes, it will also involve a little bit more. And in Jesus' day, that little bit more included a pool in Siloam. Today, that little bit more might include doctors, might include counselors, might include medication, might include stretching, might include meditation, acupuncture, or some other act of healing. And whether that little bit more is necessary because we didn't have enough faith in the moment, because God wants to teach us something, or whatever the case might be, the reality is that is the process we'll have to undergo in order to experience healing and restoration. So let's start wrapping up. So as a reminder, if you have any questions, comments, or thoughts, go ahead and send them now to awakenqa@gmail.com. And as you're doing that, I'm going to close with just another thought, 2 to 3 minutes. And the way I want to close is to talk to not specifically, to the other 80%, right? If you're in that 80%, odds are you know someone in the 20%. Odds are there's someone you love and care about who's in that 20%. In other words, just because you're not personally struggling with mental illness issues doesn't mean that it doesn't affect you. So here's something I want to teach you. If you're in that situation, something that we taught in church before, but we're going to revisit because it's important and I don't want you to miss it. I want you to understand how to apply 2 words, right? And these 2 words are symptom and severity. Symptom and severity. Again, we talked about this before in the church. It needs to be pressed in again. Symptom is subjective evidence that something is wrong. In other words, what I say is wrong with me can be recorded as a symptom. I don't have to prove it. If I tell you I have a headache, there's no way you can prove whether or not I have a headache. It's a symptom. It's something you just have to trust me and say, all right, that's a symptom. That's something they're describing that's wrong with them. Severity is the extent of damage or pain. And generally, when we think about severity, we think about it as mild, moderate, major, or extreme, right? Severity just tells you how bad it is. When you put these 2 together, symptom and severity, they should guide how quote-unquote treatment happens, how you care for that person who is struggling. So for example, if the symptom is mild, like say a headache, that's a relatively mild symptom, and the severity is also mild, like yeah, it's just a little bit painful, then treatment tends to be pretty mild as well, right? Take some Tylenol and get some rest. If the symptom is major or severe, for example, suicidal thoughts, hallucinations, delusions, that would be a major symptom. And if the severity is major or severe, then you know you are well beyond your capabilities and you need to either call the police or get them into the emergency room. Does that make sense? That's the range. Knowing the symptom and severity will help define what the response should be. Here's the trick. Most people don't take the time to discern what these two are. And the reason why is because you won't listen. So the lesson I want to close out with is when someone you know, someone you love, someone you care about is struggling with a mental illness and they open up to you, listen to them. In James chapter 1, it says, "Understand this, my dear brothers and sisters, you must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry." I know this seems really simple, and I know all of you are probably thinking, I do listen. And I'll tell you, the problem is you're not. Right? When someone close to us shares that they're struggling with depression or anxiety or suicidal thoughts, and we're hearing it, we don't tend to listen. Most of the times what we do is we go into spin mode. And here's what spin mode is. Someone shares these suicidal thoughts, but you can't be suicidal. You're such a happy person. How can you possibly be suicidal? You're minimizing it, right? Or someone comes and shares with you, someone you love, that, yeah, I'm feeling a bit depressed. You're not depressed. You're just having a bad day. Maybe you're having a bad week. We all have those. Heck, let me tell you about the time I really struggled with ... Does that make sense? That is not listening. That's spin. And in our minds, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make them feel better, but what we're actually doing is we're overlooking their symptoms and minimizing severity. And quite literally, that is the worst thing you can do when someone opens up to you, is to overlook symptoms and minimize severity. Because when we do that, we're humiliating them. We're telling them that they're not valued. And instead of feeling safe coming to us, now they feel unsafe and marginalized. You have quite literally done the worst thing you could possibly do by not listening to them and going into spin. So don't spin. Listen. Here's what listening means. You make eye contact. You don't try to solve their problem. You give them your full attention. You let them describe their symptoms, and any questions you ask should simply be to clarify, not to interject your own thoughts or ideas. And you should ask them how bad it's been. That'll tell you their severity. Then get them appropriate help. Hebrews chapter 6, and we'll close with this verse and jump into Q&A. Hebrews chapter 6, verse 10. "For God is not unjust. He will not forget how hard you have worked for him and how you've shown your love to him by caring for other believers as you still do." If you don't have this passage written down somewhere, go ahead and write it down, because this is what God is saying, right? God will not forget when you work hard to care for someone in your life. So do it, please. All right, so let's tackle Q&A, and before we do, I also want to mention that on PowerPoint, the next slide, we've got some discussion questions for those of you who are meeting at home, or if you've got some other families, groups of families coming together and meeting together, and you want to talk about what we've gone through this morning. These discussion questions might help. I don't know how long they'll be up there, but you can take a quick picture of them, and we'll see how that flies. So, oh man. Okay. All right, question 1 in 3 parts. Gotcha. How do you think the church can better love and care for those who struggle with social anxiety, generalized anxiety, or other psychological challenges that may inhibit their ability to feel loved and cared for in the typical ways? By this, I mean the standard before and after time at Awaken and other churches where everyone is talking, sometimes loudly or very loudly in groups. Wow. All right, I'm sorry. Let me go through that again. How do you think the church can better love and care for those who struggle with social anxiety? So, in other words, you are struggling with some type of generalized social anxiety. And after church, before and after church, you feel like when you're coming in and people are talking loudly, you are not feeling safe and not feeling cared for. Okay, that's an interesting question. First off, let me start off by saying that I'm sorry that you're struggling with an anxiety disorder. That's a really tough thing to have to, a tough load to bear. That's something I've had personal experience with, just people I love in my family who've wrestled with anxiety, with an anxiety disorder, and it is really challenging to manage. And sometimes you can feel very easily, much more easily than others, feel overwhelmed and flooded. Um, I would say that if your anxiety is tied to social contexts, part of the challenge in that is to be saying that when you are in a social context that you like, when you're knowingly putting yourself in one, like here at church, having a couple of close friends around you or people that you know who you've shared with the fact that you have this anxiety disorder and have shared with them, hey, this really helps me when I'm feeling flooded or overwhelmed. I think having them close to you and help guard you would really be a huge help. Because sometimes when we get flooded or we just don't know what to do next, we can start panicking, and then just the anxiety continues we continue to cycle through anxiety, right? And so if we have at least one person who cares for us and loves us, they can be with us, they can gently say, hey, Frank, let me help you get some space right here. And so just kind of lead us out into a private area, take us out to the parking lot area, into an empty room where we can just kind of settle. That would be a huge help. I think the idea that I want to share with you is assuming you're moving forward and being cared for, in order for others to care for you, they need to know, not everyone, but at least a few close friends need to know, and then taught what would be helpful behavior. And so if you can organize that in your mind and then share it with them with clarity, and then just kind of make it a point to kind of be around them when you're in these social situations or when you're concerned that it might be overwhelming, I think that'll help a tremendous amount. Even if they're not right next to you the entire time, if you're starting to feel flooded, and for me, if I'm starting to feel flooded and I know, all right, I need to go to my wife and I need to just let her know and she'll know what to do, then you can get help. So hopefully that's a helpful thought. If that did not tackle the question as you intended it, then feel free to grab me at some point, text me, call me, and I'd be happy to walk through that in more depth with you. But thank you for sharing it. Question 2, how could you help a non-Christian friend struggling with mental illness, especially if they don't have a safe, understanding family or community? How could you help a non-Christian friend struggling with mental illness, especially if you don't have a... That's a great question. So, there's a lot to this. So let me just start taking a run at this, and we'll see how this all plays out. First of all, I want to be clear that just because someone is not a Christian does not mean that they're unworthy of care or attention or healing, right? That is absolutely not true, and we're not implying that in any way, shape, or form. When we're talking about Christians, part of it is I'm communicating this within the context of a church, and part of this is the topic is so big I had to choose a very narrow slice. And the third part of it is that we Christians do have a blessing that non-Christians do not, right? We have Christ, and Christ has offered us hope in ways that the world does not have. So all that being said, just want to say is simply because someone is a non-Christian doesn't mean they're unworthy of love, care, attention, and healing. So I appreciate your heart in saying, I want to be one who cares for and loves them in the midst of their struggle. Without knowing the specific mental health condition, I just think it's going to be tricky, right? I think encouraging them to get help is always a good step. What oftentimes distinguishes mental illness from normal anxiety versus anxiety that is diagnosable, or normal depression or a depression that is diagnosable, or I am obsessed with something versus it becoming an actual disorder, is oftentimes that line that delineates the two is going to be how it impacts my ability to function normally, right? When it crosses that line, and so whatever disability I'm having, anxiety, depression, whatever it might be, obsession, compulsions, eating, whatever it is, when it crosses that line of reducing my ability to function normally, then it crosses into this world of mental disorder, right? If it's manageable and if I'm functioning perfectly normally, then typically you don't necessarily cross that line. So that'd be the first thing I'd establish is, okay, as I'm in relationship with them, is this just a concern? Are they just using the words without knowing what it means, but it's not really disruptive to their life? That doesn't mean, again, we don't care for them, but it means that the treatment and care is very different than if they're on the other side. So let's assume that they're on the other side, that this is something that is significantly disrupting their ability to live a normal life. Then I would take the next step and say, in addition to being a friend and listening and caring for them, are they getting additional help? Have they shared with their family? Have they communicated with a doctor? Have they initiated counseling? In other words, put themselves in a place where they can be cared for by professionals, right? Again, same analogy that we would use for physical symptoms. If someone comes up to you and says, my leg hurts, and you look at it, it's a small bruise, then you're like, suck it up, rest, and ice it down, right? You could care for them. But if it's a broken bone, then you're like, you need to get to the hospital. The symptom and severity matters. And so in this case too, right? If it's crossed that line, you should immediately concede that my help is limited and they need more than I can provide on my own. And so helping them get that care is oftentimes the most helpful thing that you can do. So that's probably where I would say would be the good first step. Beyond that, I mean, again, we can go down a number of different rabbit trails depending on the situation. What if they don't want to go? What if they are going? What if their parents don't understand? I mean, there's a lot of different roads to go down. Without more details, it'd be tough to run all of them, and I don't want to squander the time we have. So appreciate that. Again, if there's anything you want to follow up on, feel free to do so. I'm running out of time. Question 3, what's the difference between sharing a story similar to theirs that happened to you to make them feel not alone versus making it about you rather than listening? Great question. So the question is, hey, so if I'm listening to someone share with me, I want them to know that I can identify with them, but when is that appropriate? I love Stephen Covey shared a principle that I live by, right? Seek first to understand, then to be understood. So that principle tells me that if the other person is confident that I understand them and that I've listened to them and I've given them sufficient attention so that they're able to say, thank you so much for giving me your attention, for listening to me, and for helping me out. At that point, you can feel free to share your story. Right? At that point, if they're willing to hear or listen, you are free to share other things. It's the idea that don't start interjecting your understanding before you actually understand. Right? Seek first to understand and then to be understood. That would be the line there. And again, it is a tricky one that can sometimes navigate. I would say if you're really not sure, ask. Right? And by saying, so they're sharing with you something really personal, and then I would just say, that is really tough, and I can't imagine struggling with that day in and day out the way you have been. You know, I know for me, I've gone through something a bit similar. Would you be okay if I shared that with you? If they say, no, wait, there's some more I want to tell you, then wait. If they say, sure, I'd love to, that would be an encouraging thing to hear. Awesome, dive in. Okay? So if you're ever in doubt, you can always ask. Last question, and we're wrapping up. What are your thoughts on a guy-girl pair who feel comfortable enough with each other to share about their mental illness? If, for example, a girl-guy only feels comfortable to share those more intimate thoughts with the opposite gender, how do you feel about that? What is some advice you can give? Wow. That's a really interesting question. I do think sometimes in the church we can get a bit paranoid about guy-girl relationships. And we assume that every interaction between a guy and a girl could automatically lead to sex and ruining their lives, getting pregnant, and the whole 9 yards. So I think that's pretty ridiculous, okay? So, and sorry, I didn't mean to use that S word. If your kid was listening, sorry. Anyway, having said that, I do believe that when the relationship gets really intimate and vulnerable and is between a guy and a girl, there should be a few more flags, caution flags that are put up. And again, it's not a clear no. It's just, hey, before we proceed, we should be, putting some guardrails up to make sure that that vulnerability doesn't get taken advantage of by one side or the other. That's the guard that should be put in place. And so I think it's fine that a guy and a girl friend shares mental illness struggles that they have with one another. I'm just simply saying setting in place some good guardrails would be important too, right? And what those guardrails might be, again, it depends on the nature of your relationship. But yeah, to be able to say, hey, that when we talk about these things, let's not talk about them at night in a car at 1 in the morning, right? That's probably a bad idea to be really vulnerable and intimate when physically your defenses and guard is down anyway. So that would be the example of a boundary that we would set, is if we're going to be sharing intimate things with one another, let's do so in a place where we're both alert in public and to talk about them appropriately, right? And if we feel like one or the other person is crossing a line and this is becoming more than just two friends, then we should have that conversation and be open about it. So hopefully that helps. And with that, I do think, oh man, we need to wrap up, but there's just one more. What do you do if you have a non-Christian friend who knows about your mental illness, intimate struggle, and feel more comfortable sharing, processing with them than with a brother and sister? That's totally okay. I think that's fine. I do think when you have non-Christians speaking into the life of a Christian, I always do think there is a sense of hearing it with a grain of salt because the world's wisdom simply isn't God's wisdom, right? So for me, for example, there are some people in my life who they say something to me, I trust absolutely. And I have other people in my life where I think they're great people. I think they have good judgment. But because they come from a very different place than I am, when they say things to me, I kind of filter it before I won't just mindlessly go. I think that's how I would treat non-Christians as well, is in a sense, I don't mindlessly follow or obey just because they said it, but I do have a bit of a filter and distinguish worldly wisdom is not God's wisdom. How does what they share with me line up with the scriptures? And if they're consistent, and they very well could be, then okay, I can feel a bit more freedom moving forward. So anyway, I appreciate your questions. I appreciate tackling this topic and you giving me the opportunity to do so. Let me close out in a word of prayer. Lord Jesus, thank you so much for your tremendous goodness and grace. Thank you that, God, you are faithful even when we are not. You care for us, and you are a God who is our Jehovah Rapha, our healer and restorer. And, God, that you are about the business of healing us even today, even when we don't recognize or acknowledge it. And I thank you that whatever journey we are on, we have the opportunity to walk alongside our God and Creator, the Savior who has given his life for us. That is a beautiful way to live. I thank you for my brothers and sisters and for those who have been tuning in and hearing this sermon. And I pray that your Holy Spirit, you would minister to their lives. And if they are struggling right now with a significant mental illness, God, that they would get the care that is needed. That your Holy Spirit, God, I pray that you would give them just a little bit of extra attention and that they would experience your love for them. We love you. We thank you. We praise you. And we are blessed by your Holy Spirit, and we are grateful for this time we have. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, saints, and be blessed.